Look, obviously a disappointing loss. Kind of a hard-fought game that, we kind of felt at halftime this was going to come down to a possession. We didn't make enough plays. There'll be some things, and I just told our team, there'll be some things we like that we see on this film, and then there'll be some other things that we've got to correct. I thought the penalties were a tick high for us. That's going to hurt us. I thought we defended the run well. Kind of go from there. Any questions?
That was Sean Payton after his debut as the Broncos head coach, feeling a familiar result of some of his predecessors in that role. The Broncos on Sunday lost their Week 1 2023 opener to the Raiders 17-16. It was the seventh loss in a row to the Raiders dating back to the start of the 2022 season. Denver has still not beaten the Las Vegas Raiders. It was the exact same score by which the Broncos lost their Week 1 game last year in Seattle, 17-16. We're going to get into it all now on the Not Another Bucking podcast. I'm Nick Kosmider. I covered the team. Still do, I think, as of today, cover the team for the Athletic. Joined by producer Matt Kosmider, going to be with us tonight, just sort of breaking down this game that he watched as well. And the first thing I want to get into here when we're talking about this game is there were differences in what we saw a year ago. Like, right, we're talking about kind of, hey, this bottom line looked the same. It's an offense that put up 16 points. But there's differences, right? They had 6 possessions in this game, scoring 16 points. It was a different kind of game. So the points per possession obviously is higher than in your typical 9-10 possession game when you're scoring 16 points like they did a year ago. But ultimately they are dealing with some of the same issues, and they get exasperated by these injuries that they have. Exacerbated. But they get exacerbated by these injuries that they've had, right? Jerry Jeudy did not make it to the starting line in Week 1 with that hamstring injury. They'll hope to have him back against the Commanders next week. Greg Dulcich, their kind of mismatch joker playmaker tight end, who had a couple of big catches in the first half. He hurts his hamstring right before halftime, and he's out for the second half. And you just start to feel this lack of speed, this lack of playmaking talent in those moments that really matter for the Broncos, like they did in the second half of this game, where they had a 16-10 lead midway through the fourth quarter. They go up 16-10 on a field goal in which they had gotten a first and goal at the 8, up by 3, have a chance to create a 2-score cushion when in a game, like we said, with this few possessions, that's your opportunity to win the game in that moment. They can't come up with that score despite a first and goal at the 8. They settle for the field goal. Raiders go right down and score. Broncos have one more chance, end up punting, don't get the ball back. So we're going to get into a few things, but that was my overarching takeaway is this team is going to be more balanced under Sean Payton. They got to the line of scrimmage quickly. They executed a perfect end of half situation in the first half where they expertly, Sean Payton expertly uses his timeouts as the clock's ticking down for the Raiders with about 3 minutes to go in the first half. They get the ball back with about 2:30 to go. No timeouts, but on the right side of the 2-minute warning, they go down and they score a touchdown. And they, so again, things like that we just didn't see a whole lot last year. But man, Matt, this team is going to still be playing on a razor's edge where you just feel like, gosh, they're going to have to be darn near perfect a lot of weeks in order to win the game.
Yeah, and Samaje Perine had one reception where he broke a tackle and took it for about 20 yards in the second half. But apart from that, you didn't really have a lot of those like individual playmakers making plays. We didn't see Jaleel McLaughlin make any play besides a 7-yard loss where I guess he got face masked. So that's kind of an explosive play for the Broncos offense this week. But apart from that, there just wasn't that kind of really standout star performance, and not having Jerry Jeudy affects that. And definitely losing Greg Dulcich, who we earlier in the week on the podcast mentioned, or last week, I think mentioned, was kind of looking like their number 2 receiver behind Cortland Sutton coming into the game. So losing both those guys early on definitely didn't help. But like we did mention, though, that there are positives to take from this game. The first scripted plays from Sean Payton is one of the things that he does so well as a coach. He comes in with a clear game plan, and the players executed that really well. They went down on their first drive and they scored a touchdown. They looked like a well-functioning offense. Russell Wilson was moving out of the pocket. The offensive line was holding up pretty well, all things considered. I thought McGlinchey played pretty well today, considering what he was up against for the most part. At least in pass protection. The running game wasn't quite what they were hoping, I think. But I think given what the level of skill is on this team, this is the kind of game they played the way that they needed to win. And unfortunately, there were just the ball rolled the wrong way a few times for them, and that ended up not happening tonight.
Yeah, and that, like, you make a good point, like, in some context for this stuff too, right? Like, they were sort of not a good out of the package team last year amongst many of their faults. Like, they only had in 17 games last year, they only scored a touchdown on their opening drive twice. They do that here in week 1. Russell Wilson only threw 2 first quarter touchdown passes all of last year. He throws a first quarter touchdown pass in his first game. He did not have a game last year in which he had 2 touchdown passes until week 4. He has 2 touchdown passes in the first half. He only had 3 games last year in which he threw 2 touchdown passes. On both of those plays, they were nearly identical. He comes in, they develop a play in which he's got guys in various levels across the formation going to the right in the end zone. He has some pressure both times. He ducks out of it. The first one, the touchdown to Lil Jordan Humphrey in the back of the end zone, was a great play by Wilson. Like, Crosby, McGlinchey did play him pretty well. I thought they used a second blocker a lot, where they had a tight end chip him way out, and then McGlinchey got to kind of get in his set for a while and really kind of get ready for him. But in one of those times, Crosby did get right inside of McGlinchey and kind of right in Wilson's face, and Wilson just really calmly ducked back around McGlinchey to use him almost as like a pick in basketball, and then goes to his right, hits that throw. The second throw to Cortland Sutton with only 12 seconds left in the second quarter was a similar play where he gets out to his right. He played really well. He completed 17 passes in the first half. He didn't complete more than 15 passes in any first half of all of last year. So again, like, they hit these benchmarks offensively in the first half that, like, were either rare or non-existent a year ago. And I think in a game in which they only had 6 possessions, which you and I were talking about, you can go back 23 seasons of Broncos football. That's as far back as True Media tracks it. And they never had fewer than 8 possessions in a game. So, like, they made the most out of what they were doing offensively. And you're right. I don't think every game plan they're going to be able to say, hey, we're just going to bog it down this week. Like, a couple of weeks, they go to the Miami to play the Dolphins, who put up 36 on the Chargers today. That's going to have to be a different game. But they executed the game plan well. They did what they wanted to do. And I think there's not really much that Sean Payton did that you can, say, oh my gosh, what were they thinking? He onsides kicked to start his Broncos tenure. And, you can say whatever you want to say about it. He said afterwards, it wasn't some random thing. We had seen it on film, this exact thing. And to his credit, like, the Raiders were not in any way prepared. Like, the only person near that ball when it first neared that 10-yard mark was Traymon Smith of the Broncos. He happened to touch it just a hair before that 10-yard mark. And so they get the illegal touch. The Raiders get the ball at midfield. But
right. And like, I get that. And like, the play looked like it should have worked. So in theory, we absolutely love to congratulate Sean Payton when he makes those kinds of calls, like in the Super Bowl, and they work, and they are very gutsy calls. But there is a downside to that kind of play calling. The Raiders didn't move the ball consistently this entire game. It was something where they also had hit or missed drives. They only put up a pair of touchdown drives themselves. One of them, though, was off of that onside kick where they only had to move 45 yards to be able to score a touchdown, which they did. So while agreed, it should have probably worked, there is that downside that if you kick that ball away, are they able to move 75 yards and score a touchdown? Maybe, maybe not. But there is something to be said about when you have a defense that is this dominant. Do you want to start the game off by putting their backs to the wall that early on and kind of setting the team up where you're playing from behind?
Yeah, no, it's not like it's definitely not a thing that's without risk, and I'm sure that they had talked through it, ad nauseum. I think part of it was sort of understanding that this was going to be a low possession game, and you're saying, hey, maybe we can come out and we can steal one right away, get the ball back. Like situationally, they sort of understood where this game was going to be, and it really kind of played out that way. Like I had mentioned that the way that they handled the end of the first half was brilliant. But I would push back on the notion that the Raiders offense didn't execute for much of this game. I thought they were actually pretty good, and for the main reason being that the Broncos were unable to put any substantive pressure on Jimmy Garoppolo. Now he is a guy, and that what they run, Josh McDaniels, they run that Patriots, that quick hit offense. There's not a lot of like slow, long developing plays. There's not a ton of opportunities to get after the passer, but there still are always going to be those third and long, obvious passing situations. There's going to be second effort plays where he has to leave the pocket. And the Broncos just did not produce consistent pressure in those situations. Even when they blitzed, they were not able to get to Jimmy Garoppolo with any kind of regularity. And you saw how that started to really, really hurt Denver on that last play, the last real play of the game. It's a 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6, something like that. And the 49ers are the 49ers, Jimmy Garoppolo. The Raiders, they get a first down, they melt the clock away. He drops back. They brought a blitz to try to make sure that they got there, and he is still able to evade and get 8 yards and pick up the first down, and then they kneel out the ball from there. So that's another thing that we had talked about a lot going into the season was no more Bradley Chubb. They didn't draft anybody from a pass rushing perspective. They didn't go out and sign anybody in free agency outside of Frank Clark, who at this point looks like he's just going to be kind of a situational pass rusher for them. So there, there's big questions there. They're going to have to figure out a way, Vance Joseph is, to manufacture pressure. And if ultimately that means more Drew Sanders, I don't know what that's going to look like, but they've got to figure out a way to get after the passer.
They do. I would argue too, though, that coming into this week, we talked about what are the keys for the Broncos defensively, and we said we had 2 main keys. It was stop Davante Adams and don't let Josh Jacobs run all over the place. And if you're game planning around Josh Jacobs and Davante Adams, and you're saying the other people may get some plays and get some yards, but we're okay with that because we think we can keep pace with the other players in the game. I mean, Josh Jacob carried the ball 19 times for 48 yards, 2.5 yards a carry. Like, that's phenomenal defense. That's the league leader in rushing last year, and you held him to 2.5 yards per carry. That's phenomenal. Davante Adams, he had a pretty big catch on the first drive on 4th and 1 where he kind of ran a pick route, but then it was able to find some space to convert on a first down. But overall, when Pat Surtain was against him, he played phenomenal defense. When Surtain wasn't on him because they'd moved him to the slot, they were bracket coveraging him. Like they put a lot of focus into stopping those 2 guys, and they did a really good job at that. So I'm wondering if they prioritized stopping those 2 guys, stopping the run, stopping Davante Adams beyond some of the more exotic blitz packages that you might have seen. But then the last play does definitely stand out. You bring 6 and you lose contain, and Garoppolo runs for that 8 yards. And that just ices the game, and that feels horrible for sure.
Yeah. No, so that was the those were the 2 big drives you look at. Was the one that they finished before Garoppolo picked up that first down. The Broncos had one other opportunity on that drive to potentially get the ball back. Jimmy Garoppolo hits Jacoby Myers just in front of the first down marker. He's kind of going for the ball, awkwardly goes down, and here comes Kareem Jackson, who had lowered his shoulder in a similar way, but kind of clearly hit in the chest Davante Adams early in the game. The 4th down catch you were mentioning, he got walloped by Kareem Jackson, but it was a clean hit. The referees ruled that this one was a penalty. Again, it's we talked to Kareem in the locker room afterwards. He says it's just one of those bang situations where it is very, very difficult for a defender. But again, there's a maliciousness or not, which it wasn't for him. He's like, he knew the down and distance, like he had to stop him from getting a first down. That was the only way they're going to get the ball back and win the game. And so you're kind of doing that by any means, but it was one of those things where it looked bad, and obviously Myers stayed down, and the flag came out a little bit late on that play. So it was a tough one for them there because that was essentially it. The Raiders needed one more first down. Even had they stopped Garoppolo, that even had they stopped Garoppolo on the 8-yard run, you would have had they probably would have kicked a field goal there with about a minute left to go up 4. No timeouts for the Broncos, have to go down and score a touchdown. It was going to be a really difficult situation from that point on. The Myers play was really probably about the game.
Yeah, and even if that penalty doesn't come in, we talked earlier, they've got 4th and 1 from about midfield. There's a decent chance they go for that. And, you run in Josh Jacobs, you coin flip Josh Jacobs for 1 yard on 4th and 1 in the fourth quarter. And that's not a guarantee turnover by any means. We discussed that penalty a little bit earlier. I wasn't a huge fan of it after I watched it back. But just because Jacoby Myers kind of cut and went back in a little bit of a weird way. So that was really hard on the defender there to try to anticipate that, because he's expecting Jacoby to try to get the first down, and he kind of just gave himself up and didn't even try for it, which the defender wasn't really ready for. So kind of it feels bad to get to that point and give up that first down. But like we talked about, there were already a couple times where you lost out on points you should have had. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Will Lutz's day today. He missed his first extra point, and then he missed again on a kick from 55 yards, but both of those kicks were wide right. And obviously coming into this offseason, there was the kicker battle going on. Lutz has only been in Denver for the last 2 weeks after getting signed, after getting picked up from this offseason.
Yeah.
And I hate to be the one to do it, but Brandon McManus now on the Jaguars, so they cut this offseason 4 of 4 on extra points and 1 of 1 on field goals today. So you make those 2 kicks, that's a completely different situation.
It really is. It really is. And you miss the first extra point, and then now it just kind of puts you in something of a weird score situation, because you get that second touchdown and now you're only up a field goal, as opposed to being up 4 points, right? And then, same thing with the 55-yarder. Like when they went down, if they had make the 55-yarder, now you're already up 16-10, and then you drive down where they had a first and goal at the 8, and then end up not scoring a touchdown. Well, that field goal puts you up 19-10. So with like what was it, like 8.5 minutes to go. That's a much different game. There's no doubt about it that those 2 missed kicks, particularly the field goal, which again, 55 yards. But that hurts you. That hurts you big time. It changes the complexion of what you have to try to do. And, he was really obviously dejected in the locker room. Says, the hardest part about that for a kicker is your team has put you in a position to win, and you don't hold up your end of the bargain. There's not a crappier feeling than that. So, but he's been through it, went through it last year, didn't have a great year. I think that's the worry, right? Is he did not kick particularly well last year, and the Broncos are going to be in these close games, and you have to be able to trust your kicker. And they decided to cut theirs. Brandon McManus had his kind of down year last year, but he still hit 78% of his kicks. And they asked him to kick some long ones, right? Last year, like 64 yards in week 1. He got a 63-yard game winner against the Ravens. So he was asked to kick some really long ones last year. That was difficult. The other big thing for me was that last that drive that got to the red zone where they had a first and goal at the 8. I thought on the first down play, Adam Troutman kind of comes out in the flat. I thought Russell Wilson had him like right away and could get him the ball, and then he would be able to get to the end zone. Well, then you see the play on the next possession where the Broncos have to eventually punt. They're 3rd and 11, get it to Troutman in the flat. He looks like he has just nothing but free range to run, and the safety closes on him in a heartbeat. And you see the difference between a guy like Greg Dulcich. And again, this is not a knock on Adam Troutman, who he's a sure-handed, good blocking, reliable tight end. It's just they don't like that is a possession where you need a guy to break a tackle, to make a move, to whatever the case might be. And he might just not have that in his skill set, but you're pressed into playing a guy in that particular package, in that particular route, if your other guy at that position is injured. So again, it all comes back to me to where big picture wise, not having a pick inside the top 60 in the last 2 drafts, these things start to show up in games like this. When you see like that, you just don't have the depth of speed, of playmaking talent. It starts to show up.
Yeah, it does. And on the injury front, the other thing we were hoping to hear from Sean Payton that we didn't get an update from was Caden Stearns going down. We also don't have an update for him. He didn't return to the game after going down early.
Yeah, he was ruled out right away. He
right.
got carried off on a cart. That looks like it's going to be a pretty significant injury. We typically find out the next morning through, MRI and additional messaging, additional imaging, whether it is a full ACL. The murmur was that hopefully they think that the ACL might be intact, but we're probably pretty clearly looking at a pretty serious knee injury that'll keep him out weeks, if not longer.
Right. So then that kind of beats up that secondary a little bit more. Pat Surtain seemed to have a really good game today. Damari Mathis got beat a couple of times for the pair of touchdowns, which that if you have a guy like Pat Surtain taking away a team's number one, the cornerback on the other side is going to see a lot of targets coming his way. The first touchdown was a back shoulder throw that he played okay, but kind of wasn't in great position. The second one was more of a zone look that they kind of split the zone with a good slant route. But if additional injuries to that secondary aren't going to be doing them any favors on a team that doesn't have a ton of depth beyond the kind of the starters in that area.
Yeah, it wasn't just the touchdowns with Damari Mathis. He had a penalty. Had a couple other routes that guys got in front of him. Certainly wasn't the best outing for him. It's going to be interesting to see Riley Moss, the rookie corner out of Iowa, the 3rd round pick. He was inactive today, but they did not put him on IR after cuts because they believe that he could get back relatively quickly from that core muscle injury that kept him out for training camp. It's going to be interesting to see. I do believe they are high on this guy. That they really like his sort of field awareness, his speed. It's going to be interesting to see, if he just steps right into that role. I mean, they traded one of next year's 3rd round pick in order to move up into the 3rd round this year and make an additional 3rd round pick of Moss. So it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see whether they just say, hey, this is our guy. He's going to be the starter opposite Pat Surtain.
And then that comes with its own headaches. Just cornerback's one of those positions where the learning curve when you reach into the NFL, no matter how talented a guy is coming out of the NFL,
you can't.
Yeah, the receivers at this level are just better and faster and taller. And while you can put it together in practice and it may look great, there is a steep learning curve there. You'll see some of those double moves taking guys by surprise their rookie year. And I think that's going to be a position that we have to keep our eye on over the next few weeks or, the rest of the season to see how much good cornerback play they can get opposite Pat Surtain so that they can continue to function well on defense.
Yeah. I think a couple other things that I guess we should probably just touch on was, Javonte Williams makes his regular season return. And one of the funny stories in the locker room afterwards was Javonte Williams was talking about, Max Crosby coming up to him and just telling him that it was good to see him and like just sort of like playfully hitting, that injured knee, tapping it in the huddle because it was week 4 last year when Javonte Williams suffered that injury and it was on a tackle by Max Crosby. And so Williams, he's like, he probably has a little bit of guilt for that or whatever. And he says, it's part of the game. We all know that. But I think it was cool for Crosby to see him in there. And I thought Javonte looked good. He had 51 yards on 13 carries, I believe was the line. Broke a couple tackles. Not quite as impactful yet in the receiving game. I think one thing where you're going to see him still be taking a little bit of time is that, sort of quick acceleration after the catch. That's what's not quite there for me yet. And they're getting him out on the flat a lot. I think one thing about the Sean Payton offense that I noticed watching the game today is there's a lot more built-in like safety valve release for Russell Wilson. Like he still took 2 sacks today. But the overall pressure did not seem to be as debilitating. Like he wasn't allowing every single play to get wrecked by the rush. Like I thought they did a very good job of having these outlets so that they didn't put themselves in a ton of bad situations. Like, right. Like, hey, we can survive an incomplete pass on first down. We can survive only getting 2 yards on first down. What we can't take is, these first down sacks where our drive is already kind of, toast. So I thought they'd done a lot better job of that. And Javonte Williams was part of that. I think he's just going to progress into being able to break tackles in those modes, to shake a defender in those situations more so than he probably was there. But then again, and P. Ryan, I thought looked really good. He had a 20-yard run. He broke a tackle and made a 12-yard run, was the one that got them down to the 8-yard line. He had 4 catches for, I believe, 32 yards or 34 yards, something in that range. So he showed some ability to break tackles in that facet of the game as well. So I think there was just a lot to like about what they're clearly trying to do, right? Is this, they have this, you saw it a lot with Mike McDaniel when he was running the 49ers offense, was this pitch play, right? This pitch, but you're actually going inside. Right, we always think of the toss as like an outside play, but it's sort of that way of getting the ball to the running back quicker, and then allowing him to run inside. I think it's a really fascinating wrinkle that we did not see the Broncos use in their backfield last year.
Yeah, and I did think that Javonte, when he was running the ball, did look really good. We didn't really see any kind of downfield use of the running backs in the backfield, which even like one of the first preseason snaps for Williams, we saw him lined up outside. We didn't really see much of that today. I'm wondering, and part of that might just be that Sean Payton's offense is something that's going to be considered very complex. It's not something that you're going to have mastered the first week of the season. So it may just be that we haven't seen that offense fully unfolding. It may still be they're doing things that they think are in the comfort zone of both the running backs, the wide receivers, the quarterback, or Russell Wilson. But that is something that we didn't see any like downfield wheel routes out of the backfield. It was always just that safety valve kind of play. So I'm kind of interested to see whether or not we get more of that as this season unfolds and the offense kind of evolves into its final form.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely get that. That'll open up. That'll become a little bit more, of a weapon that they use. I think getting receivers into the run game is something that we saw a lot in training camp and in the preseason. I'm sure that will be something that gets added to the mix. That was another thing we didn't really see a whole lot of today. I was a little bit surprised by the lack of Jaleel McLaughlin, and I do wonder whether like with a rookie, sometimes whether you see a play right away that just doesn't necessarily inspire a ton of confidence. Like he had the 7-yard loss in the thing. It was a play that he was sort of set up to fail, although we won't know, until they look back through tape of, hey, maybe he was in the wrong, he read a wrong key or whatever the case might be. But, he got to, you mentioned it earlier on in the pod, he got face masked. I tweet out like, what is it with these Broncos rookies and like getting ripped down by their face masks? That happened to Marvin Mims in the last preseason game, almost got his head taken off right in front of the end zone. So that was his welcome to the NFL moment was right. Jaleel McLaughlin, his very first play on the field. And right. then he has
15 yards is 15 yards,
Hey, exactly. But then he had like another run that I think he was either no gain or lost a yard, but it was a holding call anyway. So that play didn't count. So he goes down even though he had the ball 3 times, he goes down as simply 1 catch, -7 yards. I got to think they're going to find a different way to utilize him against the Commanders next week. So yeah, those are some of the things that I think stood out. I think the bottom line when sort of 10,000 foot view of this game. Look, I think obviously when you're talking about them wanting to be a playoff team, beating the Raiders at home, it was an important game in a lot of respects. They've lost 6 games in a row to the Raiders. That there's part of this that just feels so inevitable sometimes for this team, and that's something that they're trying to shake. Randy Gregory said in the locker room afterwards, he's like, I understand, and I'm sure that there's fans who might be saying, here we go again. He said, we're a different team. We're a lot of different players this year. We know the work that we put in. We just didn't get it done today. And while that's fair and certainly accurate, Mike McGlinchey said too, like, hey, when you're building in a whole new culture, you're bringing in new players, like these things take time. That's all fair. But the bottom line was this: in the task of trying to make the playoffs, this was a pretty important game, just based on the schedule, based on what they'll have. But if this was just sort of the very first step of what this offense could be, I think there's reason to be optimistic in terms of its overall functionality. But man, they're going to have to stay healthy. They're going to have to identify whether some of these young, speedy guys like Marvin Mims, like Jaleel McLaughlin, can have a more explosive presence in this offense. Because again, I just look at it sometimes and say they are missing that punch. They're missing it on the edges on both sides of the ball. So they're just gonna have to play pretty darn perfect football. I think sometimes to squeak out these wins.
And they're going to need to make some dang kicks.
They're going to need to make some dang kicks. We'll leave it there. We thank you guys for joining us for another episode, post-game episode of the Not Another Bucking podcast. We'll come back middle of next week with another episode, and then we will also be back on here after next Sunday's game against the Commanders, where the Broncos will try to even their record at 1-1. Until then, thanks for watching and thanks for listening.